All right, everyone. So my name is Donald O'Leary. I'm a research scientist and data science educator here at the National Ecological Observatory Network. On behalf of my colleagues Claire, Alicia, Marie, and Andy, thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we're excited that you're here to learn more about our organization and what we do. So a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. This meeting is being recorded. So you all have come into the room already on mute. If you could stay muted for the duration, unless we call on you to speak, that would be great for our recording purposes. You can leave your camera off or on if you want to share with us. We always love to see smiling faces out there, so it doesn't feel like we're just talking into the internet, but actually to real people. So that's great if you choose to share your camera. We love to interact and engage with people on these calls. The best way to do that is to enter your questions into the chat window. We have several NEON folks here, so we'll be monitoring the chat as we go. If there's a question that's really pertinent and we want to interrupt our presenter, we'll do that in a gentle way at an opportune time so we can have your question addressed. Otherwise, we've saved 10 minutes at the end of this presentation for a Q&A session. So we'll begin by going through those questions there. If you do want to interact with us, verbally and ask your question that way, we'll save that till the very end. At which point I will reintroduce the rules, but we'll have you use the little raise hand feature and we'll call on you and get the questions going that way. Last thing to mention is we have several presenters on this webinar. We're just going to introduce ourselves as we segue into the various sections of our presentations. I'm going to close my email there so it doesn't ping as we're going, and that's all the housekeeping. So let's go ahead and get into it. So today's webinar is entitled Getting Started with NEON. And we're going to introduce you to the data and infrastructure that we're developing to better understand changing ecosystems around our continent. So what is NEON? We are fully funded by the National Science Foundation, and we are a continental scale ecological observation facility operated by Battelle. NEON provides free and open data on the drivers of and responses to ecological change. So we're really interested in ecological changes that might be happening in response to climate. We offer a standardized and reliable framework for research and experiments. We make our protocols fully accessible to the community. So if you want to do science in the way that we're doing science so that they're all interoperable, that's pretty great. We'll show you how. Our data are also designed to be interoperable with a number of the other networks that are already existing across the continent. Our meteorological data are interoperable with the LTAR, LTER networks. Our soils data are interoperable with USDA. Our remote sensing data are interoperable with NASA's remote sensing products. So we have really been designed to be a part of this ecosystem, if you will, of scientific networks. So why is NEON important? So NEON, here we provide a really coordinated and large-scale system for monitoring a number of really essential ecological and environmental properties and variables at a wide range of spatial and temporal scales. Now, I am fully aware that NEON had some, I think, some pretty reasonable criticism at its inception, that people were really concerned that there was a lot of money going to this facility. But I want to tell you that since during my time here and seeing the publications that have come out of NEON, I think that I've been really convinced that we're doing something unique here that is unlocking science that has never been accessible before. But monitoring on such a huge continental scale and a variety of spatial and temporal scales, we are offering data sets that are now that scientists can use to ask unprecedented questions. And we're getting some really incredible novel science that can only come from this large orchestrated effort. So I've been really proud of what we've been able to accomplish here. And of course, all the science that's been happening piggybacked off of our operations. So here's just a little example of what we do to get started. So these are some images taken from Gothic, Colorado, up at the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab. And you can see here pictures taken at the same time of year for 3 different years. And in these 3 different years, there were 3 really different snowpacks that had occurred. They melted off at different times and resulted in these pretty dramatic differences in the landscape. You can see in 2011, there's a lot of snow, a lot of water, ended up with a lot of great wildflowers. The next year, it was drought conditions. And the third year is kind of more average. So this is just a snapshot of what we do at NEON, where we're taking observations of meteorological and ecological processes using a variety of measurements, in this case, proximal remote sensing, if you will, and making these data available to the public so that folks can make their own inferences based on these data. Here's another diagram that explains kind of the spatial and temporal scales of our operations. We're studying everything from microbes at the smallest spatial scales and their processes that occur very rapidly, all the way up to continental scale processes and seasonal to interannual changes. Looking at these various scales, now we can see some of the science questions that we can start to address down on the bottom. So everything ranging from genetic diversity to community composition, functional diversity, all the way up to ecosystem level processes and continental scale landscape processes. One thing that NEON is very closely integrated with is EFI, the Ecological Forecasting Initiative. So one of the big goals that we have is we want to collect enough information across the correct dimensions to be able to empower spatiotemporal models to ultimately make ecological forecasts about what might be happening. The world of meteorology and places like NCAR have done a great job trying to figure out what's going to happen with climate into the future. And now we're collecting the information and developing the tools necessary to make ecological inferences based on those climate model predictions. So how does NEON work? I'm going to get into the kind of nuts and bolts of what we do here briefly. So first thing we do is look at this continental scale. We have 20 ecoclimatic domains that we use to separate the United States, including Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico, into these 20 different ecoregions, if you will. Within these domains, we have a number of field sites. So we have 81 field sites total, and those are further subdivided into terrestrial and aquatic field sites. Those are co-located whenever possible. From these domains, field sites, we are producing over 180 different unique data products, everything ranging from eddy flux measurements to observations of small mammals, hyperspectral remote sensing. We're really trying to look at ecology from all these different perspectives and using all of these different observational techniques. Now, the ecoclimatic domain design is something I'm especially interested in. So I'm a geographer with a background in remote sensing. So we developed these much like the EPA level 3 ecoregions that I think they're fairly analogous. We used a multivariate clustering technique to try to distinguish different unique landscapes that occur across the United States. So for ecoregions like domain 1 up in northeastern United States, we have like the classic Harvard and Bartlett experimental forests, and all of those landscapes are somewhat homogeneous, kind of mixed conifer deciduous forest, all the way out to the Great Plains, or by us here in Boulder, Colorado, and the high mountains in the Central Rocky Mountains. And so we're trying to really distinguish these domains into kind of characteristic landscapes that people think of when you think about ecology happening in different places across the continent. Now, we have 3 main data collection methods that we use to take observations across these different ecoclimatic domains. These include automated instruments like temperature, relative humidity sensors, observational sampling. This is what I like to call our boots on the ground. These are people out there in the field making observations. And we also have our airborne remote sensing platform. We'll get into that a little bit more. I'd like to say that our automated and observational sampling techniques are also further subdivided into terrestrial and aquatic focused observations and measurements. I'll get into that a little bit more in the next few slides here. So here's just a very nice cartoon schematic of what one of our idealized field sites is like. So this is the place where we're able to successfully co-locate one of our terrestrial sites with an aquatic site. This would be somewhere where we have access to the land, we're allowed to make observations on it, and maybe there's a creek running through there. So you can see over here on the left, like this image behind me is our most conspicuous piece of infrastructure. This is the Flux Tower with a number of instruments on it. We have an individual out here in the middle taking a measurement of a tree. We have our airborne remote sensing platform and our aquatic field site, which is heavily instrumented over there on the right. When we have all these things next to each other, we can start to combine these measurements. So I'll talk about a couple other pieces of infrastructure and then what we do with them all together. So like I mentioned, our Flux Tower is probably the most obvious piece of infrastructure. We have a similar micrometeorology observation station at our aquatic sites as well. We also take observations in the Earth. So in our terrestrial sites, we have an array of soil observation instruments, tracking everything from carbon dioxide, temperature, soil moisture, heat flux, things like that. And our aquatic sites will be observing groundwater and, of course, stream flow and water quality and things like that. And when we can combine these all together, we can start to get a much more holistic view of what's going on in these sites. So in this instance, we're looking at a variety of our different hydrological observation instruments. And when you put them all together, you can get a much better sense of what's going on with the whole hydrology cycle here, everything from precipitation through runoff, soil, through flow, and down into the stream. Similarly, we can take a number of observations regarding carbon dioxide. So using our Flux Tower, carbon dioxide in the soil, water quality in the stream, and combine those all together to get a much better understanding of the biogeochemical cycling of the carbon cycle in these different sites. So you can see how combined all of these instrumented systems together can give us a pretty good holistic understanding of what's going on in these field sites. When it comes to our observational sampling, I like to think of these as really supplementing what's going on with the instrument sampling. So I'll go back a little bit. If we're looking at our carbon cycle, we want to know how much biomass is occurring in the trees, how much is falling off of the trees, how much carbon is in the water moving through the streams. So using these observational sampling techniques, we can get information about the trees, the plants, the fauna that are occurring at these sites, and also some measurements of the physical properties, such as the bathymetry of the stream. I would be fully remiss without giving a huge shout out to our field operations experts. Our scientists out there in the field are rigorously trained to follow protocols so that all of these observations are interoperable and intercomparable. They're also consummate experts in what they do and fully dedicated to our mission here. I mean, these folks go out in the worst weather, in the hottest, most humid conditions, all the way up to, you know, freezing cold up in Alaska. And they always seem to have a smile on their face and they're pretty excited about it. So huge shout out to our field operations staff. I think some of them are on this call. We really appreciate you. And we couldn't do what we do here at headquarters without all the effort. So it's a huge team effort that we have going on here. And Marie's going to go into a little bit how you can interact more with our field experts out there in the different domains. Last thing I wanted to mention about our sampling is the airborne remote sensing that we have. So we collect everything from high resolution RGB camera information. We have hyperspectral data, which is fairly unprecedented to have really good hyperspectral data free and open to the community. We also have waveform LiDAR instruments, and we also deliver those data in kind of point clouds, which are more familiar to folks who work with LiDAR. Thing to note about our remote sensing is our aircraft are able to visit these field sites at most once a year, and they try to go during peak greenness. So it's hard to get a sense of phenology using our airborne remote sensing, but we do a pretty good job at capturing the landscape when it's at its most robust, most productive, and greenest state throughout the year. Last couple of things I want to touch on are how do you use NEON data? Well, first of all, I'd recommend coming to our workshop in June. I'll pitch that at the end of this call. But Marie and a couple of other colleagues just recently put together this page, Getting Started with NEON Data and Resources. I have a link down here at the bottom. I'll throw that into the chat once I'm done here. This is a great one-stop shop for how do you get started with like data tutorials? How do you find our data? Links to our YouTube channel, which is awesome. I love our YouTube videos. So all sorts of great resources here for you. I wanted to point that out. Here at NEON, we also collect samples and send them to our biorepository, which is in conjunction with Arizona State University down in Tempe, Phoenix area. So if you are the type of scientist who wants to look at some of our beetles that we have, our soil samples that we've taken, everything down to genetic information we've collected out in the field, you can request samples out of our biorepository, and some of those are even able to be sent to you for destructive research, which is not very common in the ecological world. So if you need to have your hands on these in your own lab, that may be possible and worth looking into. Last is our assignable assets program. So this is a cost recoverable program that you can use to leverage our infrastructure and expertise for your research. So we know it's really expensive to fly people around the country and have people go out into the field and take observations for you. If our folks are already there, you can do no more than pay for their time and whatever equipment it takes to conduct your research. So this can be a really great opportunity to expand the scope of your research and the footprint of what you do using our infrastructure and experts. And this is also something that Marie's going to touch on here in a moment. So that is all that I had for my part of this presentation. Thank you all so much for your attention. I'm going to hand things over to Claire here, which will just take a quick handoff. I'm going to make you presenter. And I saw Marie dropped a couple links into the chat while I was talking. Thanks so much, Marie. Really appreciate that. Claire, I think you are good to go.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I am Claire Lunch. I'm a staff scientist on NEON project. I work on NEON's data pipelines and also on tools and resources to help users work with NEON data. So I'm going to be talking about some of the research that's been done using NEON data. And I want to say this isn't going to be a comprehensive view of all of the work that's out there using NEON, and it's also not going to be a deep dive into the science of any one particular product. This is really just a sampling to give you a taste of what's happening. So I'm going to be talking about 5 different projects that use different types of NEON data to give you a sense of the breadth and the range of science that's possible to do using NEON. With the hope that some of these projects may spark ideas for you about what you might be able to do with NEON data and resources. So the first 2 studies that I'm going to talk about both involve identifying individual trees from remote sensing images using machine learning techniques. So this is a popular area of research. This first paper that I'm going to talk about is attempting to identify individual tree crowns, which is, if you think about it, kind of the first step to doing anything else on the individual level. First, you have to find the individual trees. So this image here is from the Disney site in Florida. The individual trees identified by this machine learning model are outlined in the red boxes. And I think this image really shows sort of where the challenge is in this kind of work. If you see on the right side of the image, we have, isolated trees standing out among shorter vegetation. They're relatively easy to identify. But on the left side of the image where the canopy is closed, it's a much bigger challenge to find the individual tree crowns. And so the other thing I wanted to highlight about this work is that this particular research group is very committed to open science. And so they have put interactive tools online that let you explore their model and the tree crowns that it identifies at all of the forested NEON sites. So I encourage you to check that out at that URL. Okay, so this next study is coming from a different research group that tried to take the next step and identify tree species from remote sensing images. So this is, not just there's a tree here, but what species of tree is it? In this particular study, they used both the LiDAR and hyperspectral data, but only at a single site. So that obviously, reduces the scale of the challenge. You're working with a single ecosystem type, and a relatively small number of species. The site that they used is a conifer forest in California, and their study area included 7 tree species, plus they had an 8th category for dead trees. So this table shows the number of individuals of each species that their model identified as each species. So the way that works is this diagonal here, the numbers on this diagonal are the correct identifications, and the numbers off of the diagonal represent the times that their model identified a species incorrectly. So overall, the precision and accuracy that they got in this study was 60 to 90% across the 8 species categories. For 6 of those categories, it was over 80%, which if you're familiar with this kind of work, that is a pretty impressive success rate. So like I said, this kind of area of research is very active, and I think it's going to be really exciting to see where this goes over the next few years in terms of these models evolving, and particularly these types of models being applied to a larger diversity of ecosystem types. Okay, so this next study used NEON's microbial sequencing data. So this is sequencing of microbial communities in soils. NEON runs analyses on soils using both 16S amplicon sequencing and whole genome sequencing. So this research group used NEON data as a test bed for comparing those 2 sequencing methods and the level of information that you get about the microbial community from using each of those methods. So in this figure, the image on the left is whole genome sequencing. The image on the right is 16S. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds of how to interpret these plots, but basically the text represents identifications. And so you can kind of see at a glance that the whole genome sequencing is identifying a larger number of taxa than the 16S sequencing. And this second figure shows a similar conclusion in a different way. So this is the diversity of identifications at the genus level as a function of the number of sequence reads. And so you can see really clearly that for the same number of sequence reads, a much larger diversity of genera are found with whole genome sequencing. And then this third figure shows identifications in different taxonomic groups. So the blue squares represent taxa that were not found in a particular analysis. The 4 right-hand columns are the 16S data, and the 4 left-hand columns are the whole genome sequencing. So what this figure really highlights is that the 16S sequencing finds very few of the eukaryotes. It missed some bacteria as well, but really the largest difference in diversity found by the 2 methods is in the eukaryotes. And I should say, I don't think that the intent of this study is to criticize 16S sequencing. It's really just to get a sense of, okay, what are you going to learn about the microbial community from each of these methods? And what is their suitability for certain purposes? Okay, this next study was testing a very specific hypothesis in community ecology and biogeography using NEON's small mammal data. So the hypothesis is described in this conceptual figure. It is that as you move from colder to warmer climates, species richness should increase, and the degree of overlap in trait values between species should decrease. So adding up to greater niche displacement in warmer climates. So like I said, they tested this using NEON small mammal data, and the trait value that they used to test trait overlap was body size. So this second figure from the study shows the actual data in the same sort of framework as the conceptual figure. Here, climate is getting warmer as you go from the top to the bottom of the figure. So the top panel is a site in Wisconsin where there's almost complete overlap in the distribution of body size among the mammal species at the site. So then moving to warmer sites, with the warmest site being the Jornada in New Mexico, you see this increase in the number of species. There is, some overlap in trait distribution, but overall, there is a large increase in the differentiation of body size between species at the warmest sites. So, strong support for the hypothesis that they started out with. So the final study that I'm going to talk about is one that used NEON samples, but ran additional analyses on them that are not part of the core suite of NEON data. So Donald mentioned NEON sends samples to the biorepository where they're available for request by community members who have their own funding to run their own analyses on those samples. And so that is what happened here. So this study used soil samples from all across the observatory, and they analyzed soil organic carbon to get a picture of what molecules and what classes of molecules that carbon is found in. So this figure shows the overall abundance of different carbon-containing molecules from those soil samples across the observatory. But what you really want to know is how those molecular types relate to each other and how are they distributed across this large climate space that NEON sites occupy. So that is what we get in the second set of figures. The top figure shows the correlation between each of the carbon-containing molecules. And the bottom figure shows the correlation between the abundance of those molecules and various ecosystem traits. So temperature, precipitation, soil acidity, vegetation chemistry, and so forth. So this was a fairly exploratory paper. The strongest relationship that they found was a negative correlation between lignin and protein. Soils that were high in lignin tended to also be high in total soil organic carbon and aluminum. And there's some really interesting discussion in the paper about how to interpret those patterns and whether they reflect a spectrum of decomposition efficiency, different carbon profiles in vegetation, that sort of thing. So that is it for the research highlights. Like I said at the beginning, it's really just a very quick view into some of the projects that have been done across a range of data that NEON publishes. But I hope it's given you a sense of the possibilities of what can be done using NEON resources, and that NEON has something to offer in many different fields of study. If you're interested in exploring other NEON-related papers, there is a public Zotero group where we keep a running list of NEON-related publications. Donald is putting that in the chat right now. Thank you. And so you can check out more papers there. And with that, we're going to hand it over to Alicia.
So thanks, Claire. Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Krall, and I am on the education engagement team. I help support a lot of the program's strategic engagement activities, including a lot of our efforts in equity, diversity, and inclusion. I want to talk about one of the networks we recently established associated with some of that work. But I wanted to kind of highlight some different ways that you can engage with the NEON program. So we currently have a number of different external advisory groups that support the program. They help advise on the protocols that we implement, the data products that we're developing, and basically help support all areas of operations. So we currently have 23 technical working groups, and again, they range cover all different areas of the observatory. So if you're doing work in aquatics or soils or remote sensing, or even are doing a lot of work in community engagement, we have different technical working groups that you may be interested in advising. We also have kind of an overarching science, technology, and education advisory committee that looks kind of across recommendations that are coming from all of our technical working groups that bring in expertise again in some of these different areas that are a focus of the observatory. So I basically on this slide here kind of showed you where you can go on the Neon Science website to find additional information about the different technical working groups. So there's a Get Involved tab at the top of the site, and then you'll see another tab display on the left, advisory groups. But you can nominate yourself, or you can nominate someone else to serve on one of these advisory groups. We review nominations every year in October and make selections in November. And so service, occurs that following year. So again, if you are interested in being engaged in that way, this is a really great way to be more involved in the observatory's operations. But again, learning more if you are interested in actually using NEON data for your research or in your teaching. So next slide, Claire. Another resource that we have available, several teaching modules have been made using NEON data. They're all available on the CUBES Hub website. I'm actually going to grab that URL for you here so everyone has it. But there are a number of teaching modules. Many of them have been created by faculty who have been engaged in one or more of our Faculty Mentoring Network programs. We also have a YouTube channel that can be linked from this CUBES website, and there are several different videos that you can use in your classroom to teach on different areas, again, related to the observatory. So next slide, Claire. One of the more recent faculty mentoring networks was supported and led by the Ecological Research as Education Network. Their website is erinweb.org, where you can find out additional information. But they developed these online learning modules to help support faculty and students during the pandemic that were needing to do some field type activities either at their home or in close proximity to their home. If you go to the website, there are actually a list of the different modules that are available, and they cover different areas. So there's one related to plants in the human altered environment, backyard beetles and pollinators, mosquitoes, lichens, and then two more recent ones covering phenology and also sapsuckers. So for each of these, there are curricula resources, and there are also webinars that have been recorded and are available that kind of introduce you to the modules that have been developed. And again, there are a lot of other additional resources associated with those, including assessment tools. So next slide, Claire. Another initiative I wanted you all to be aware of that I mentioned previously, there was a conference in 2019 that was funded by the NSF Includes program that led to the development of a new network, the Environmental Data Science Inclusion Network, that specifically focused on examining equity, diversity, and inclusion at the intersection of the environmental and data science fields. We currently have about 231 members, 19 different network contributors to the program. We have monthly community calls that we lead that are kind of focused on different priority areas that have been identified by the community. So some of the most recent ones were on cultivating inclusive instructional and research environments, the CARE principles for Indigenous data governance. We have some upcoming ones that are being led by the Academic Data Science Alliance on considering ethics at each stage of the data science workflow. We also are having some presentations by some of our other partners, AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange, and also NCEAS, which is the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. So next slide, Claire. So this is just some of the logos of some of our partners that have been involved in the Edson network to date. But if you're interested in learning more or in being involved in any of those conversations, or interested in joining one of our technical working groups or being engaged in NEON in any of these ways, I'm going to be adding my email address into the chat window. So please do reach out and let me know, and I would love to connect. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marie.
Thanks, Alicia. I'm going to quick share my screen, everyone, so I can start my presentation. Okay, so I'm going to be going over how to connect with our field science staff at our domains and all the different types of engagement that we do there. So just a quick recap. Donald touched on this, but I want to make sure that I go over it a little bit more. So we have 20 ecoclimatic domains, and you can see those are outlined by this blue line. They're across the United States, as well as in Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. And then we have one headquarters office in Boulder, Colorado, outlined by the star here. So who actually does the work at these domains? Well, each domain has a field operations manager, as well as 5 to 10 full-time field ecologists. And we have that range of field ecologists because our sampling is very different depending on the domain. So Alaska has a very short sampling period, whereas Florida has a very long sampling period and almost samples the entire year. Additionally, we hire a team of temporary field technicians, and the number of technicians also varies per domain. They start in the spring and they typically work through the fall. However, that field season will also change depending on the domain location. Also at our domains, we have one assistant outreach coordinator per domain. And so here we can see Katie, domain 14's Arizona outreach coordinator, located in Arizona, excuse me. And then I'm the outreach coordinator for all of field science and all the folks that work at headquarters. And so I help facilitate all of that local outreach at each domain office. So now I'm going to get into a little bit more of the different engagement opportunities at our domains. And first are assignable assets that you can get through our field offices. So as Donald mentioned, we have an assignable assets program. It makes available certain components of NEON's infrastructure to members of the community to support the research or other activities. And specifically at our domains, there are 2 types of assignable assets that are super useful. So first, we have field sampling support and site coordination. And so what that really is our field ecologists sampling data for you, also facilitating that coordination between our site hosts for you to get those samples on our sites. And then additionally, we have adding sensors to NEON infrastructure. You can add sensors to our aquatic infrastructures, as this station we see on a buoy here at one of our NEON aquatic sites, but also on our flux towers that Donald pointed out earlier. And then we also have other forms of assignable assets, flying over our sites with our airborne observation platform and taking, flying over non-NEON sites and taking remote sensing and LiDAR data and hyperspectral data. We have a mobile deployment platform that's a mini NEON site that we can take to different locations across the country, and you can also get excess samples. So lots of different assignable assets for you to use. But I want to point out that these are more than just assets, and Donald touched on this earlier, but our field operations staff are very trained in all of our protocols. And in fact, every year we do a refresher training during the off season for our full-time field ecologists. They're also trained in equipment installation and maintenance for all of our automated instruments. And then additionally, I want to point out the localized expertise. Some of our field ecologists have been working at these domains for over 5 years. And so they know exactly the site and the type of sampling done there to make sure that the samples that you're asking for are great. So if you are interested in requesting an assignable asset, the way to do that is to go to our website for our research support page, which we'll put in the chat in a little bit. And so you go there and you make out a request, and then we do a feasibility and technical review, and that takes about 2 weeks. Then we do a review of the pricing and costing of the project, which takes about a week. And then we do a contract and work agreement, which will also take about a week. So the whole process takes about 1 month. And then after that month, we can actually get those assignable assets going. So now I'm going to get into a few more engagement opportunities we have for you with our field science staff. So before the pandemic, we did in-person site visits and tours where folks would come to our sites and learn about our infrastructure and learn about our field sampling protocols. So here we have 2 different examples of that. This is a class from MIT, an undergraduate field methods class that is receiving a tour of our Hawaii site. This is a grad student class from Kansas State University receiving a tour of our Konza Prairie Biological Station site in Kansas. But we don't only do tours for undergraduate and graduate classes, we also do it for community groups and individual researchers. And even though we can't do in-person tours right now, we have done some virtual tours of our field sites for different classrooms. So definitely if you're interested in that, reach out. And then also we have done tours of our airborne observation platform. So as Donald mentioned, our platform flies across the country during field season and peak greenness. And so you can actually come to the airport hangar that our airborne observation platform is at one of our domains and look at the Twin Otter, the equipment, and everything to do with that platform. Right now, unfortunately, since we can't do in person, we can't do that, but we do have, we are doing a virtual tour as well. So lots of opportunities for site visits and tours going on. We also do presentations for local conferences, seminars, and classrooms. So back when things were in person, we would go to high school classrooms, undergraduate classrooms, and graduate classrooms and talk about NEON data and how you can use it for education and research. We would also go to local conferences and talk more about NEON data and how it's being used locally. So for instance, this is Becky Long, a Domain 8 field ecologist in Alabama, presenting at the Southern Division of American Fisheries Society Conference. And then additionally, we do data skills workshops and webinars just like this one. We do multi-day Explore NEON workshops and collaborative workshops with other organizations. These multi-day workshops, we used to do them in person and we hope to do them in person again in the future when things get back to that. But right now we are doing virtual ones. And these are typically around 2 days, and we really get in depth of specific topics with our data and tutorials, and they're really great if you have a big group of people really interested in using our data. But we also do shorter access and work with NEON data workshops, which are anywhere from 1 to 3 hours, where we kind of give you that quick overview of how to work with our data and resources. And even though we can't do these in person right now, we do virtual ones. So Alicia kind of mentioned this earlier, but another engagement opportunity is to bring NEON data into your classroom. And so we've worked with multiple faculty across the country to bring NEON data into graduate, undergraduate, and high school classrooms. Here we see an example of Virginia Tech students using NEON data in their environmental informatics course taught by Dr. Quinn Thomas, and they use NEON data as capstone projects. However, Alicia mentioned the Quantitative Undergraduate Biological Education Synthesis Network and our collaboration with them earlier, but I'll just touch on that a little bit more. We've worked with faculty to bring NEON data and R into their classroom and to develop teaching modules like this on specific topics. And these modules have lesson plans and R Markdown documents for the analysis that they have their students do. So they're kind of a really great introduction to bringing NEON into your classroom. And then we've also partnered with organizations like SciTeens to bring NEON data into kind of high school students' lives and Sciteens is kind of like an online environment to bring data into after school programs. So really exciting ways to bring NEON data into your classroom, both kind of locally and across the country. So some other engagement opportunities we have, we participate at community events. So for example, here we see a Domain 9 field ecologist in North Dakota participating in the Audubon Society's annual Christmas bird count. But we also have booths at like Earth Day fairs and science fairs. We also do local career fairs and panels, and we do mentorship and job shadowing. So here we see some University of Arizona students job shadowing and learning about NEON at our Santa Rita Experimental Range site in Arizona. So that perfectly segues. We hire lots and lots of temporary field technicians every single year, and we would love for more to come work with us, especially this year. We're still hiring right now because it's the spring. Field technicians will gain valuable experience in training in ecological sampling methods and procedures, conducting ecological field and laboratory work, and working alongside and networking with early career ecologists and scientists. And you can find more information about that on our seasonal fieldwork page on our website. I also want to talk about a really unique engagement activity that NEON is participating in right now. So right now, NEON is collaborating with the American Geophysical Union's Thriving Earth Exchange program. So this program connects communities with scientists and supports them as they work together to tackle local challenges related to natural hazards, natural resources, and climate change. So what they do is they develop and implement projects which are guided by local community interests. And there's kind of a 4-step process associated with this. So they work with a local community to scope and find a project. And then they match that community to a scientist to help solve that project. And then they share everything that came out of their solving of that project. And so NEON is collaborating with the Thriving Earth Exchange to develop and implement community projects across our 12 domains. So we have 12 community science fellows that are actively right now either working with communities or trying to find communities that are interested in working with NEON to solve pressing local issues. And so if you're interested in learning more about that program, we actually just had a blog article on it where you can learn about all of our fellows and the types of things that they're interested in, and hopefully we'll have some more blog articles in the future on the projects that we'll be doing. But you can also reach out to me at the end of this. And so lastly, I just want to end with showing you guys how to actually contact our field science staff. So if you go to our staff page and type in manager, you'll get to see all of the different domain managers. And if you click on this, you can get to their email and phone number. But also you can just go to our contact us link, which will give you a general form, and we will get you to the person that you need to get in contact with. So that is it for me, and I'm going to hand it back over to Donald.
Great. Thank you, Marie. Let me share my screen again here. All right, and I'll drop a link into the chat here to this page that we're looking at. So that was our hook, and I hope we've piqued your interest in learning more about NEON. What I'm going to pitch for the next couple minutes is our open to kind of our open access Explore NEON workshop. This is a new format for us. We usually do these workshops in conjunction with a university or a particular entity, but we're really trying to make lemonade here. And because we all live in Zoom now, we're going to try to make this kind of a big tent kind of thing. We want to invite people from all around the world to come join us for this workshop. So I'll tell you a little bit more about it. This is going to be the week of June 14th, so right in the middle of summer, hopefully avoiding academic conflicts for people. We're asking people to apply to this workshop. So we have an apply here link right there. This is going to be a 4-day workshop, 3 hours a day for the duration of that week. And I've listed the learning objectives here. We're hoping that people are going to come away from this with an understanding of the wide variety of data products that we have here, a really practical understanding of how to work with these data in the R programming environment. Claire and I lead quite a few kind of follow along coding examples. We're also going to have 3 different breakout sessions where you can sign up to join to work with a subject matter expert in a particular area. If you're interested in working with hyperspectral remote sensing or learning how to make biodiversity indices from our aquatic macroinvertebrate data, we're going to really get into the details there. So that should be very research applicable skills you'll learn from those. You're also going to learn in much greater depth about the resources that Marie and Alicia were describing earlier. How do you engage with our field staff? How do you bring neon science into your classroom? Things like that. Just the last couple of things I want to mention is we are going to record these sessions, but we'd really prefer you to be there in person as much as possible. If you don't think you can make it there in person, we recommend that you still sign up because we can send you the YouTube playlist of those recordings afterwards so you can follow along with that information on your own time. And if you want to learn more about this workshop, I've listed the tentative agenda here as well, and some links to Claire and myself, our kind of overview page or personal pages if you want to get in touch with us and learn more. So really hope that you are interested in joining that workshop. We really look forward to reading through those applications. We're going to accept as many people as possible in the scenario where we have kind of a good problem on our hands of too many people applying. We are going to grade those applications based on 1, if you're affiliated with a minority serving institution, because we really want to empower all of you folks out there to work with NEON data. And 2, we're going to prefer the applicants who have a pretty strong and clear idea of how you want to use NEON data in your own teaching or research. So we asked for a few sentences about that. If you can put some thought into that, that would really help us and help out your chances. So that is all I wanted to mention about this Explore NEON workshop. I have been monitoring the chat here since we've been going. I haven't seen really any questions come in, but now this is your opportunity to ask some questions. So please go ahead and type those into the chat window if you like. If you'd rather unmute yourself and ask verbally, we would ask that you use the hand raise button. So if you look on the bottom of your WebEx window, there's a smiley face that says reactions. And if you click on that, you can click the raise hand button and we'll be able to see that you'd like to ask a question. At that point, we will call on you so you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. So again, thank you to everybody for joining us here. Let us serve you and answer your questions. So, okay, I see a question coming in from Gabriela. Do you have any volunteer opportunities in Boulder, Colorado? Marie, is that something you can respond?
Yeah, so we normally don't do volunteer opportunities, especially right now with things being virtual. However, like I said, if you're interested in working with us, that is a possibility. Yeah, but we typically don't do volunteer, but that is something that we could take into account and think about for the future. So if you are interested in that, I would recommend reaching out to me or using our contact us form so I can let the people at the domain know you're interested.
I added my email address in the chat earlier, but I will add it again if anyone does want to reach out to me directly. And Marie, would you add yours as well?
Yeah, great idea, Alicia. I'll throw mine in there too. happy to continue to answer any questions if people want to throw it in the chat, but I think maybe also just as happy to give everybody 5 minutes back to their day. I'm going to throw a link into the chat here. This is our post-webinar response survey. If you could respond to that, should take 5, maybe 10 minutes. It'd really help us out to help us improve our engagement opportunities like this one. I'll send this out as well in a follow-up email with a link to our YouTube recording of this meeting as well. I see another question just came in from June. What standards do you use to ensure data interoperability? Claire, can I direct this one to you?
Yeah, so that is obviously a large question. I think sort of the short answer is in general, we work with other institutions in the field. So, specifically, for example, with our eddy covariance data, we work closely with Ameriflux and have some collaboration with them to ensure that our data can be ingested into Ameriflux's system and served there as well. So I think that's a good example of a place where we work with a specific community to as much as possible meet the standards of data in that community.
I should add to that as well. That's where our technical working groups really engage with the observatory staff.
Yeah, great point, Alicia. There's another question that came in from C. David, which is kind of along those similar lines. I've seen some data from watershed constituents. How do we find out who collected it, for example, university researchers or otherwise, in case we have questions about the sampling design, etc.?
Yeah, so if it's data that are served on the NEON data portal, then they were collected the way that we've described in this presentation by the field staff here. If you have questions about the design and you want to know more about the protocols that the field staff were using and so forth, there is a document library on the NEON data portal that I don't think we had time to mention in this. But that contains, all of our protocols, the maintenance documents for sensor data. So there's really a wealth of knowledge there in terms of the design and the collection methods for specific data products. If you have questions beyond that, I would absolutely encourage you to reach out and ask. We're providing our email addresses here, but really, any of the scientists at NEON are going to be happy to answer questions from the community and help you to use NEON data.
Awesome, thank you, Claire. Yeah, and I threw the link into the document library into the chat there. It looks like we have time for maybe one more question before we're at the top of the hour.
Awkward silences.
Yeah, I always like to leave plenty of time for people to type in their questions because it can take a little while to enter it in there. But it seems like there are no pending questions here. So one more time, I want to thank you all for joining us here. Really hope to see your applications come in for the workshop. And if there's anything at all we can do to support you, your teaching, and your research, please let us know. You can contact us at our email addresses here. We also have a contact us form on our website that I will pull up a link to, throw this in the chat. So if you send an inquiry to our contact us form, we will direct that to the most appropriate subject matter expert to get you the most detailed answer we possibly can to support you in your research. So that's all from me. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.